Well, we are in the group on Waking Up White, which is a book by Debby, Irving, and I'm on core. And Manny asked us to read this book and to look at the questions that followed, and out of that grew this workshop. And I had a reaction. Why waking up white and finding myself in the story of race didn't make a lot of sense.
It didn't.
Because I never thought being white, I was part of a race. Sid, you're a part of a race.
That's
But
what they tell me.
I wasn't thinking about it in terms of me. I realized that people had some problems with race. When our boys were little, they'd go to stay with their grandparents, not my mother. And Grandma wouldn't let them watch Cosby Show.
Would or would not, I'm sorry.
Would not let them watch the Cosby Show, which they watched regularly at home. When they came home, why can't we watch it? We had a little discussion. And you may have seen recently about the two little boys, 5-year-olds, who got haircuts alike, so the teacher would be able to tell them apart, and one's black and one's white. So they don't see race as a bad thing. But there is racism. It's been a long time. The slaves is where I became more realizing about it. And do you know what Juneteenth is? Sid, do you know Juneteenth? When I went to seminary, I had more interactions with African Americans or blacks. And one lady one day was celebrating, and she's often very outspoken. And I said, "Why are you celebrating?" "Well, it's Juneteenth." I said, "What is Juneteenth?" June 19th was the day that the slaves were told they were emancipated, even though it had been signed in January.
They took that long to get the word.
And my good friend Ruth, who's black, said she wanted to go out to dinner. I said, "What do you want? Fried chicken or watermelon?" I said, "Ruth, could you be more stereotypical?" And in California, and probably some other places, but that's where I know about, the Chinese were excluded. There was the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, which was repealed in 1943. And it was the first significant law restricting immigrants for them who come to work. If they were here working, they couldn't testify against whites, they could not own property, they could not become citizens, and if jailed in San Francisco, they would cut off the queue in the back, which is very important to the Chinese, not to have it cut off. And you notice that was repealed in 1943. So some questions to ponder. What did you hear about in school about race or anything like that?
I didn't hear, I was raised in Grants Pass, but I didn't hear a whole lot about race because it wasn't an issue in Grants Pass. Blacks were not allowed to eat in our town. Blacks were not allowed to sleep in our town. My father was from the South. He was very much in favor of that. And so we adopted 2 black boys and had to leave Grants Pass.
And what?
Had to leave Grants Pass. There was nothing there for them. The educational system was against them because they had special needs also. Employment wasn't an option. Dating wasn't an option. Now, this was 36 years ago. It's not a heck of a lot better right now because I live in Medford. My family's on my Grants Pass. But the schools themselves, other than a brief little snippet about slavery, just didn't address it. And I don't remember anything about the Chinese. I was an adult before I ever heard about the discrimination against them. I mean, I heard about the Irish because my dad was, but I mean, it was But, you know, other than that, it was just a non-issue, because it wasn't there.
I grew up in McMinnville, and I kind of heard that there were no black people in the community, and found later that there were laws written that, you were not going to be moved. And there was one great Chinese restaurant, but he was not allowed to live in McMinnville. The restaurant was kind of on the outside of the town, and he lived in Portland when we were told. But we lived close to Linfield College. And some really fine football players were recruited for Linfield from the east. And they were black. And my goodness, what that really stirred things up. And so there was a lot of, I graduated in 61, okay, so this was late 50s. And I remember one issue of the wife of one of the African-American super duper football players from the East who needed a job. And there was some special people who had to go and argue very hard to the bank to get her a job so that she could work. So it was really a chance, there was lots of stuff going on.
So someone had to go and advocate for her.
Yes. Yes. Situations have changed, but that's the way it was when I grew up.
I grew up here in Albany, graduated in 59, and I don't remember any black people, children in the school system. And in fact, the first time I was aware that there might be a black family in town was when I saw a black child. Oh, well, there must be one in town, but I don't know. And then my dad worked at the Bureau of Mines. This leads to a little bit of a different slant on the question. And he kept complaining about this one man and how awful he was. And I said, Dad, you're racist. You're upset because he's black. And Dad would patiently say, no, that's not. And I kept at him. I just refused to believe that he was not racist. Well, Dad died at the beginning of my senior year in high school. And after I graduated, I went to work at the Bureau of Mines as a temporary replacement for people taking vacation. And I had interactions with this man. My dad was right. He just was a nasty man. Then I felt really, really bad. Has there ever been a time when you felt like an insider or an outsider in a group?
Well, when I went to the multicultural conference in Chicago, 1,000 people, there were only 10 white males. But I'm not thinking that way. That was what, a few years ago. But I'll just give you one with the Native Americans. I went to Colorado Springs to a workshop. They always loved me, they helped out, and I had 9 Native Americans with me from the Navajo Reservation, and I stayed in a nice hotel in Colorado Springs. And we were going to a Lyle Coleman workshop. You know Lyle Coleman, remember that? Lyle Coleman. And it was really hard on them. They're very quiet people. We all had to sit, and tell our whole life story, and that was hard for them, but they did. But I met a guy, and he goes, "Oh, you gotta have lunch down at the restaurant." Well, yeah, but there's a dress code. And he goes, "Oh no," I said, "We went there for lunch. There's no dress code." And they have a wall. You have to walk behind it, right? And he goes, "No, you don't need a dress code. We go for lunch." So we go down there for lunch, and I go, and we're all standing there at the entrance. I said to the maitre d', we're here for lunch. We're staying at the hotel. We're here for lunch. And the maitre d' goes, "Oh, you need to wear a coat. You have to have a coat." And I said, "Oh, I didn't bring a coat." He goes, "Oh, well, we have one in the back room I can get you." So when we go to the back room, comes back out, and it's about 3 sizes too small. He goes, "Oh, geez, sorry, it didn't fit." And that was the first time, probably the only time that I went, wow, wow, wow. That really is true. That was an eye-opener for me. Yeah.
Anybody else ever feel like an insider or an outsider?
In about 63, I was in Detroit, and I was the only white person living in 3 blocks. But they knew that we were there for the church, so I was welcome. But one day, somebody knocked on the door, and I answered it. Here are these 3 or 4 gorgeous black men, young men our age. I was ready to slam the door in their face, but my roommate was black, so she saved the day, invited them in, they were fine. And then it was the time of Detroit's first Freedom March, and my black friend said to me, "Are you gonna march with us?" I said, "Why would I march?" Naive as I was, and they said, "You're either for us or you're against us." So we marched 5 in a row, and here in my long blonde hair, we had no idea if there would be dogs or rocks, or it was totally peaceful. But I learned then what it's like. It was wonderful.
Can I
Yes.
comment? This isn't a comment, it's a question. How does it feel with that kind of a statement? You're either for us or against us. You ever think about that and what that means?
I didn't before that. I was a very naive young white woman. But yeah, I found that we're human beings, children of God together, it doesn't matter what color your skin is.
Yeah, I agree, but the idea that you either have to do this or do that. A lot of young people, I've been in the schools for 40 years, and a child who comes and looks like he or she is mixed has to face up to the question, are you black or are you white? Because the other kids want to know that identity. It's sort of in our minds that you gotta be either this or that. So I'm just curious if that statement sort of triggered anything in your thinking.
I just knew I wasn't against it.
No, that's, yeah.
We have 2 granddaughters who are half white and half Japanese, and I wonder about them. If you know it, you can tell it when you look at them, but what do they check on the form? The one that says Caucasian, Oriental, Black, which do they decide they are?
Why do we have to have the forms?
That's another good question. They will tell us most likely it's for census purposes, for knowing how to take care of a community to the best of their ability.
For about the last 20 years, every time I see one of those forms, now they'll all have an other. And I check other, and I write in the word human.
Oh, good.
Because they're really, biologically, there is one human race. And all these others are social constructs. And I just choose not to put anything other than that down.
I'm going to remember that.
It's just a little slight dig.
We have had some interesting situations. I was in a store with our youngest, and my mother was with me, who is also Caucasian, and my son. And he was standing at the checkout stand, waiting for us to get done. We were checking out, and he was just standing there. They called store security on him.
How old was he?
He was a teenager. She started with, "What do you want? What are you standing there for?" And I said, "He's waiting for us." She still called store security. He kind of wandered off because he picked up he wasn't welcome, and they followed him around through the store. Another time, he was in an accident, and I was with him, and the policeman tried to remove me from the scene because I obviously could not be connected to him. Our son went into prison, and he had to put his race down because they were going to put him in a certain cell block because of the whole gang thing, which I suppose has a certain amount of credence to it, but he had to decide, do I say I'm Oriental, am I black, or am I Caucasian, because he's triracial, the oldest one. So, I mean, yes, I agree. We, the white people, put these delineations. You have to decide if you're for us or against, if you're in our group or that group.
The labels are the problem.
Yeah. Are you us or you them? And we do that with lots of things besides race.
I have at times felt an insider or an outsider, and sometimes I've been wrong in my judgment of where they have put me. Well, when I was at the General Assembly in Detroit, I went to the group on divestment in the Middle East. And it was because our son had the previous GA been the speaker to present the minority report that we should invest, not divest. Well, there were a lot of Jewish people in the room, and I happened to sit next to a young lady who was going to a Jewish seminary. And we chatted. And then they said, we need you to get up and get into circles to pray. And she grabbed my hand and she said, come on. I was the only white Christian in that group. But because they issued the invitation, I was right at home. And I don't know if it would have been any different if I had just gotten up and broken into it. But they invited, I accepted. It's easier for me.
I just have to clarify after you said that. So the multicultural conference, there's only 10 of us, 1,000 of them. No, so anyway, but we quickly became an insider for the same reason. Yeah, very, yeah.
If you get included or in.
Yeah, it's up to the, yeah.
Have you ever misrepresented or misinterpreted a person of any race or a situation involving?
Oh, sure.
Well, what didn't you know?
Say that again.
Have you ever
Have I
misinterpreted a person of a certain race?
No, see
or
somebody and
situation?
assume something about their background and it turns out not to be the case.
Right. We
That-
stereotype.
That's happened more than 2 or 3 times.
And I think it's important to acknowledge, I think that as a white person, the message I was given was that to homogenize things to the point where you deny differences rather than appreciate, the differences. And to understand where somebody else is coming from is different from where you're coming from. If I'm uncomfortable with it, I need to figure out what that is rather than trying to, no, they're really not different. Their skin's different or something. They're different in some significant ways that are important to their identity. And if I'm going to really be a Christian, I need to be open to that. That's a part of them being included in a different group. That experience being included.
Can I ask you, Bill, because that's a great comment. What are the similarities between denying and celebrating?
The differences between denying and celebrating,
Yeah.
night and
There are a lot
day.
of people deny the race thing and,
Mhm.
or they like to celebrate the race thing. There's similarities to those things.
Okay.
I'm just a question because you said, and I wanted to know what you thought, what other people think of that.
The awareness.
Go ahead.
The awareness of the cultural specifications and the special things about the different cultures that are important to each person. I live in Troutman, Washington, and in that area, we have a lot of agriculture, we have a lot of Hispanic immigrants, and we have a number of indigenous people, since we live close to the Columbia River, and plus all kinds of children that kind of move in But, it seems to me that the most important thing to do is to, honor the specialness about each culture, that each person in their own culture celebrates. I am so proud of the way we do this and the food we eat and the way all this. And each one of them have special things. Now we have, there's a family of local Latinos who come around on Saturday and selling tortillas, and they're wonderful, they're homemade, but that's a special thing. Some of the Yakama Nation people that come and pick huckleberries and do business in our community and are in and out and variety of things, but you have to honor what is so special about each one of those identities, I think.
Who we are as Americans is being tested right now, and I think it's right on the surface. And I have coffee every morning, except for yesterday, with a group, because Jimmy Kimmel at the Oscars said you have to sit down with people who are not like you, because I'm going to understand them. So I am doing that. That's my pilgrimage, to sit down with everybody who voted for Trump at the table. And anyway, we, because I sit at that table here, think that people just melt. Right? I think there's a fear of not melt. I mean, these immigrants need to melt into our society. We were the great melting pot. So what does this talk about appreciating their culture? They need to melt and become American. They need to become Americans. They need to appreciate our culture. They're sitting here and we're threatened that they are undermining who we are as Americans. Don't they know who we are? And so this melt, it comes to that whole thing that we have shifted, us progressive liberal people have progressed over 60 years to where we actually look at people's differences, and the conservatives are going to get back to that melting pot, and we're all going to be Americans and get along. So that's there. When that melting, we're not talking about that, what it means to be an American. And I grew up, well, I went to college and seminary. Instead of being a melting pot, we were the salad bowl, all the different flavors are in the salad, and then you've got all these different flavors. It makes one great big salad bowl, but every flavor in there is distinct. So that's what we were taught in the 70s and 80s, But I think a lot of people, they want to put it on the stove, make sure it's stirred up a little bit, make sure.
One way they want to do it is by picking out others.
Well,
But not.
that don't melt. That don't melt. And if those Muslims are going to wear that, they're not melting. They can come, but they got to melt. Yeah. Except for that Nike.
That's a good thing.
Nike business
That's
has made the hijab for the athlete. Yep. So and that's who we are as Americans. Business always wins out. And money.
It's all
And
about
if they
follow the money.
if they have figured out how to sell, obviously there's a big enough Muslim population that needs the hijab. The Nike has figured it out. And so follow the money, and that's the great equalizer for Americans. That's what equalizes us. Is
But when you see somebody who is poor, when you see people who are less affluent, how do they melt in or fit in?
Oh, yeah.
You guys probably saw him downstairs.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that guy.
Oh, yeah, the homeless.
And I was really pleased because somebody came out of the kitchen with a plate for him. The lady went over and talked to him. His name was Irving. And yet, he stood up. I'm sitting there looking at him, and I have these images in my head of what this guy's like. The fact is that had he been white, looked like that, and had all of these emotions, I would have still thought the same thing.
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
yes. The
He was
homeless,
different, but,
poor and homeless.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting how we make those distinctions. But I noticed, I saw it,
So economically.
and I sat there and stared until I got enough courage to stand up and walk over to him. So,
Well, I was watching, I was observing it to see how, if he would be invited to have communion with us.
oh, I
That
didn't
was
see
my,
that, yeah.
my thing. And then I saw who was with him, and I knew the person who was with him, Steve Hammond. And so I thought, okay, let's get. But that pastoral thing kind of comes out, you know. And there's a whole bunch of them there, so I figured, you know, somebody would. So I don't know if he was offered, you know, that he could have communion if he wanted to. That this is
Yeah,
what
I
we're
think
doing.
those two at the front station went back, they went back and served.
Yeah.
Someone
See,
clearing the back.
I mean,
someone
we did
sitting.
something good there.
Mhm.
Yeah.
We did something good there.
I mean, I was very pleased when they took the food, took the little plate over it. But I think this is interesting to your discussion, what you're doing with us. It's what you said, the awareness thing.
Mhm.
We need to simply be aware of us, and that's what that waking up quiet was about, is a whole lot of white folks wake up, but they don't wake up quiet, because they don't even think about it, it doesn't register. And what this person tried to do, I think, was be aware that she is white, and how does that fit into our system of race and our society? So that's what I thought
Yeah.
was good about it.
It is an excellent book. It's
Yeah.
And if you are a minority, if you're a black person, you wake up black and you know it. Living in, you know, where, I mean, what you're saying is, we wake up white and we don't think anything of it.
Right.
Because it doesn't affect us, our race, doesn't seem to have an impact on us. But if you're a black person living in this part of the world, you know it.
Well,
In a different, it's much more of a factor in the way you, isn't it, in the way you navigate the world? It has to be,
well, I think so. I mean,
because there's more,
when I wake up, I just wake up, I'm excited.
yeah,
But the moment I step out of bed and the moment I step into almost any situation, I am reminded
mhm,
of the difference.
I
Yeah.
learned
Yeah.
in one of these places, I won't say who it was, it's somebody in Presbytery. She said, and she's a different race, but she says, I only realize that I'm that race through the eyes of a bigot. In other words, like you said, you woke up and just woke up. It wasn't until you went out into the world. And
Yeah.
that's what she was saying. She says, I just woke up. And it wasn't until I went out into the world that everybody said, hey, you know, you're trying, oh, yeah.
And I think as important as race is, we need to expand that. I work with mentally ill.
mhm,
Talk about somebody that wakes up knowing they're different. They know they're different before they've ever stepped out of bed because of the voices or the challenges that they're gonna face. There's a lot of delineation that we do of anyone that's different than we are. We categorize. And, you know, heaven help you if you're black and mentally ill and poor. Because you got and female, you got 4 strikes against you before you even leave your house in this particular climate that we have going. And so, yeah, it goes beyond race. That's perhaps
Yeah.
our easiest to pinpoint because it's sometimes so obvious when there's discrimination. But it's different. It's different.
What do you mean we have to expand?
We have to expand this idea of being, okay, say you're middle class, you're white, and you don't have any mental illness. You're really fortunate. But say you are. There's a lot more to be aware of in discrimination than just race. And if someone has 2 or 3 of these things that make them different, you know, I think, for instance, I worked with intensive needs kids. And I did have several black, mentally ill, and developmentally disabled kids. There was no way they were ever gonna get an even shake on anything. Not on education, not on hiring, not on dating, not on anything. Because we set it up for our comfort. We as a nation have set up ourselves for our comfort. Because we're the children. We're rapidly not, but that's flipping, but we were.
Don't you think we have to focus again on the specialness of each person? I'm thinking of the language barrier, and we were talking about being a melting pot. I
these
mean,
people,
if you're coming to our country, you gotta be
Hey,
English speaking,
you're talking-
we don't wanna do all of this
that's
stuff.
what they said around the table.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, but, I mean, think of all the dreadful things that happen to the children, like the Indian children who were not allowed to use their native language because they needed to learn English,
Anglicized.
you know, all of this kind of stuff. I heard a story from my husband's great aunt. She grew up in a family, they were Czechoslovakian immigrants. And she was like 6 years old, and she was the oldest of their family in school, and she was trying very hard to learn English. Well, this teacher, this one-room school, was not, I mean, it had to be just right, and she interpreted it as a word that Aunt Viola said was a swear word. It wasn't, it was, she was trying to give the right answer, but with her accent, you know. And the teacher got very angry. Viola went out the door and into the outhouse until after the teacher went home. I mean, some of the trauma that children trying to
Yeah.
trying to be a part of things, what we,
Trying to milk.
you know.
We have
we go to the Roseburg Church now, and across the street is a park where a lot of homeless gather. And they know we have food and so on. But they are welcomed in when we're in the church. During the service, however, the downstairs is locked, because they have come in and destroyed things and vandalized and stolen, but they don't all do that. And I volunteered for the homeless count at our church and had to fill out the forms for the people. Where did they fall on this? What was their ethnicity? Why were they homeless and all of this? And discovered they go from here to there, and much like the rest of us. And I try to make a point to talk to them when they come in after church, and some of them come to church now. But we tend to melt people, we're melting. They're homeless, and that means these things. They're black, and that means these things. It doesn't.
the one size fit, but if they just be like us, we'd all get along.
Now, I'm thinking that I'm observing younger generation being in a much better position than we were
Oh,
as far as this.
Yeah.
Because there's much more mainlining in school, and
Yeah.
I guess because of the media, they're aware that there's
And
complexity.
the little boys that were different
Yeah.
colors but didn't know it.
Yeah, that was cool.
good.
That was cute.
I give you 2 examples. One of them is we have a transgender in our school in Dallas, and oh man, city council guy, he went off, and I don't want my daughter going into the same bathroom with that guy. Or no, he's a girl that became a guy. Yeah, and so I don't, and blah blah, going off on it, on the Twitter or whatever, Facebook,
and he went national, and no, that was the Muslim thing he went national on, that's wish he hadn't done, but anyway, he's just really far out there, and, anyway, and the city council and all this, and school board's pretty cool about it, and, anyway, my daughter, who this girl now guy is in her class, since 6th grade, goes, oh yeah, you mean so-and-so? Yeah, I know.
Yeah, it's like, what's the big deal?
What's the big deal? Yeah, she became a guy, yeah, okay, yeah. She got problems because she didn't know which locker room you went, and I happened to be in the athletic with the swim team, and they were talking about, you know, the logistics of the locker room and what they had to do, and you know, there was logistics involved. I mean, they had to figure out what the locker room and an adult had to be there at all times just because of possible hazing or something, you know. So there was the logistical things that you have to worry about that I think sometimes when they just say, you gotta be transgendered or you gotta be loving and you gotta be caring, okay, great, now can you help us with the logistics here? You know, and they don't, they just say, well, you take care of it, you know, don't be a racist, and it's like, no, I got logistics I gotta worry about. And so anyway, and then the other one is mainstreaming the Down syndrome kid, Jacob, and he's been in her class since kindergarten, you know, and now that she's 16 and oh Jacob was at it again. I mean, he just mainstreamed right through. He just went, you know. I mean, you're right. I think that younger people, if we just get out of the way, I think.
I worked with some transgender kids, and I was constantly surprised that their peers were very accepting.
Yeah.
It was their parents that could not handle it and wanted them to go away or wanted us to somehow fix them or, you know, whatever. It was their parents. It wasn't even the community at large, who are obviously so bad. But I'm thinking, geez, yes, if we could get our egos and our prejudices out of the way,
These
the
younger
world might be a
generation,
better
I think,
place.
is
Our time is limited, but near the end of that book, I don't know whether it's the last chapter or a couple of chapters, but it's sort of the so what part. You know, we're talking about this, we've had a conversation, and this person tried to explain what it meant to her to wake up white. But then she starts talking about, so what are they do about it? What happens at the end?
Yeah, I don't know. It's been a while since I read it.
Yeah, me too. But I was reviewing it a little bit before I came, but just a little bit.
Well, yeah, she does have normalizing race talk here that make a list of 5 ways to shut a conversation down and a list of 5 ways to keep it going. Be aware of what we're thinking and saying. This is a lot of what she's talking about. We also have situations come up now with gay and lesbian people. Some of my seminary friends are gay and married. And a young man, very good friend of mine, joined the church in Oakland because I accepted him. And he liked me, so he came. Became a very good friend. But then our daughter-in-law informed her husband, our son, that she was a lesbian and wanted to divorce. And that hurt. But I still consider her my daughter-in-law, and we talk, as do the 2 people who split. They talk every day. And they're teaching me that it's possible to love, even if it was something I didn't want.
One of the books I'm in education, you may or may not know. But there's a book that I'm reading called The Language of Respect. And I was looking at our group and saying, if we were to go around and have each one of us introduce ourselves, it's very likely what we would do is tell each other what we do.
Yeah.
But the most important thing, particularly when you're dealing with children and with each other is, what we wanna know is who we are, not what we are. But what we are the labels that we wear. Who we are talks about our feelings, our passions, our goals, I mean, a lot of the things. So, that was one of the reasons I raised that question,
Yeah.
because I know they were talking about sort of the whole, so what, if you will. But the thing that I wanna remember is that when I'm introducing myself, I want people to know who I am, not what I am.
Can I offer a suggestion?
Sure.
That we contribute to this whole breakout sessions and tell the leadership commission that when the leader says, let's go around the room, and I say, I'm David Morelli and I'm honorably retired from Dallas, Oregon, instead, go around and say who you are, and let's get that embedded into
We can work on that.
into this here, and get that embedded. I got one other thing though that hasn't been brought up that I've been thinking about a lot, and it has to do with this, and that is rights and privileges. Now, let me give you a couple examples. I heard a black couple that was in the government said that they go around to corporations and they say, just because we're demanding rights doesn't mean you have to give up your privileges. Now, that kind of calms the waters because, you got the white man's privilege, right? And so it calms the water. But let me give you an example because it's just, and I was listening to it over. My son's very successful. He married a very successful woman whose father is more successful, and a lawyer and Stanford and Harvard, Yale, and real estate in Seattle and all that. And they have worked their way up the ladder, and they have, so to the point where they can buy. They have 2 kids, they're 4 and 1, and they're moved, they finally sold their one house and moved to the neighborhood in Seattle where the best elementary school is, in the zip code with the best elementary school. And they're saying, now he's not like this because he's pretty liberal, but he's saying, in a way, I should have the privilege to send my kid to this elementary school because I did everything, saved my money, did all of this stuff, went to college, got a good job, working 50 hours a week, so that I have the privilege of going to this best elementary school. And then somebody else comes in and says, oh no, we're gonna bus you over here, and we're gonna bus you over. Which I was just on the, listening to the radio talking about Louisville, where they're gonna maybe pass a law not to bus anymore, and that's a big thing. But anyway, so I'm saying, so we have to talk about privilege, but privilege also has to do with, and I think some of these people will tell you, this one guy, 8th grade education, super well off now, pretty rich. Why don't I have the privilege to do what I want? I had an 8th grade education, and look what I've done, And I said, yeah, well, you're white too, so just remember that, you're white now, just remember that helped a little bit, I know you don't recognize that. Another guy who owned a bank and is a banker, why not have the privilege, I worked hard for what I've got. So when we sit there and say, well, other people have rights, we have to say, so my dialogue now around the table when I have coffee with them is, especially around the medical, this whole thing with the Medicare. Because they're saying, well, why don't I have the privilege to go to my own doctor? Why can't I do it? And I said, fine. But don't you think everybody has a right to medical care? I mean, really? No, because they didn't work there and they're homeless, they don't have a right. I said, no, you're telling me you're a Christian and you give all this money away and everything and all that, and you're telling me you want them to start? Come on, you're better than that. They should have a right. Well, yeah, maybe you're right. I said, I'm not telling you don't have the privilege to have your own doctor. You worked for it, and that could be true of any, I was thinking about it as I do it, any race really, because look at Michael Jordan, LeBron James, all those star basketball players, they have earned the privilege to do certain things that other people can't. And so to sit there then and say, we're gonna take away all those privileges. So I would like to hear some privilege rights debate, because the white man privilege thing is now a big deal. Well, David, you're white, you got white man's privilege, you just are where you're at because you had certain privileges as a white man to get to Princeton and go to seminary with me. So, just
Yeah.
throwing it out there.
Well, it's my
Haven't
fault
read-
we're late,
No,
But I
we're
was-
staying at 12:05,
Thank
we're
you.
good. We got 5 more
I do
minutes.
have a handout that is a little exercise to maybe find out where you are on a continuum of things.
David, maybe try
You
them
have something to
with
say?
privilege comes
You've
responsibility.
observed
That's my next thing, yeah, yeah,
I-
privilege
and I
comes
mean,
responsibility.
The other thing I have to
Yeah.
say is that 12:05 is when the clerk's report begins and we should be back in our seats. So we do need to wrap up now.
Sorry, I
Sorry, that's all.
shouldn't have changed the subject.
I thank you for coming
It's
and,
just one.
Okay.
David,
and opening.